In the next 14 minutes, I'm going to help you save your novel. Beginning writers often structure whole sections of their books based on these 9 myths, and it can really ruin their books. But if you watch this video, you will learn how to avoid these common mistakes. We're going to be talking about points like the danger of staying inside the circle of your novel, and also when digression is better than moving the plot forward. But let's get started with the very first myth, which is surprises are better than suspense. I think beginning writers tend to prioritize surprises because they're like, oh yay, surprises are fun. Like, who doesn't like a surprise in a novel? But on the whole, I think they tend to give less attention to the technique of suspense. But I really think suspense is kind of the bread and butter of writers. Surprises are like a boom, and then it's over, while suspense you can extend for large portions of the novel. And the perfect example of this is Alfred Hitchcock. He had an idea called the bomb theory. Surprise is when you have a bunch of people sitting around a table, and all of a sudden, a bomb goes off. And yes, of course, the reader or the viewer is going to be shocked. Suspense is when you have those same people sitting around a table, but now you tell the reader or the viewer that there's a bomb underneath the table. There's certainly no mystery, but everyone is wondering, when is that bomb going to go off? Hitchcock believed that audiences are more engaged when you tell them what's going to happen, and that allows for a longer period of suspense. Now, myth number 2 is a twist I'm not sure you've heard before. It is extrapolating Chekhov's gun principles to the whole story. Chekhov's gun says that if you show a gun on the mantelpiece, that gun must go off by the 3rd act. But I think writers have taken that principle, which is a good one, but they've extrapolated it out to a whole general storytelling principle. Anything you show in your story should have an impact later on. Well, I mean, there are limitations and downsides to that sort of writing idea. It's quite often good to have moments of existence that don't neatly fit into the plot or neatly fit into foreshadowing. Atmospheric stuff, or stuff that builds the theme, or yes, just the texture of life. I think what that does is it helps the universe of your book to feel real and authentic rather than contrived and artificial. There's this Canadian writer named Guy Gavriel Kay, and he said that you want to show the reader that the world of your novel exists outside your characters and your plot, that there is a broader world out there. And so maybe you do want to show a completely random traffic accident that doesn't actually figure into the plot in some way. Or maybe you do want to show a fight between strangers in the supermarket just because it makes the world feel real. And for those of you who need more help with plotting, in my novel course in Bookfox Academy, I have videos like the 7 elements of a bestseller, which includes some very helpful PDFs, and then also videos like 5 storytelling guide ropes, which just helps you along the journey of getting that overall plot down. Now, this 3rd myth is probably the most important myth in this entire video, and it is the story happens before the secret is revealed. A lot of beginning writers, I think, have this assumption that all of the story, or at least say 90% of the story, should happen before that big secret is revealed in the climactic moment. But the truth is that a lot of the oomph of a story can come after a secret is revealed because we get to see how all these characters react to the aftermath. Now, Liane Moriarty wrote a wonderful book called Big Little Lies, and it was turned into a series, and we're actually going to talk about the series for this example. So at the beginning of the show, there are 2 mysteries. We know somebody has died, but we don't know who, and we know someone has killed him, but we don't know who. And then at the end of the first season, we learn the answer to both of those mysteries, and spoiler alert, it was the abusive husband who was killed, and it was one of the women who pushed him down a flight of stairs. And then there is a 2nd season. And so you no longer have that mystery powering the plot because all the viewers know what the mystery is. Instead, we are attracted to seeing how these characters deal with the aftermath. Now that the cat is out of the bag, they are dealing with the psychological after effects of abuse. They are dealing with police officers investigating the crime. And it's a great example to show you that a story doesn't end when a secret is revealed. It opens up so many more possibilities for where you can take your story. Now, if you are writing a typical genre novel, then yes, most of those do end when the mystery is revealed. But for all of you people out there who are writing in different genres, use a secret, say, in the middle of a book, and then explore what happens once that secret is out. Now, this 4th myth is a doozy. It is narrative efficiency is always better than digression. I've actually spoken about this a number of times on this channel, talking about the Moby Dick chapters, where it's all about like the size of whale heads, and also in Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, all those chapters about the Sumerian language and the history of it. Or recently I was reading Murakami's Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, and there are all these chapters of backstories of super minor characters, and the reader's wondering, why are we getting all of this? Now, usually I come down on the side of like, be wary of gigantic digressions. For every one reader that's like super interested in that, there's gonna be 10 readers that are gonna put the book away and be like, you lost me. I'm not saying never do it, I'm saying be wary of it. But let me add a caveat. Small digressions are absolutely wonderful. And really, they're essential for your book. Let's look at The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsen Hamid. This is a book about terrorism and about radicalization after 9/11, but there is a scene where they're in New York and they just see fireflies. And they're wondering whether this firefly can survive in a big city. It doesn't really have anything to do with the plot, but it's just this nice pause, this nice digression where they watch fireflies. Now you could say, oh, that's a thematic element because they're feeling like they are the fireflies and wondering whether they can survive in a big city. Yes, but my point is, like, it's not plot-based. It's just a nice little breather. So listen, in your novel, remember to take breaths. Sometimes when I read a very popular commercial novel, something like, James Patterson novel or something, I feel suffocated by just this relentless pace. And, I'm begging them, like, please just take a paragraph and do something other than plot, anything other than plot. So yes, in your book, please use digressions. Just understand that the longer it is, the higher the chance that you're going to lose readers. Now, this fifth myth is one that I see really often as an editor. It is the payoff should come quickly after the setup. So what I see in a lot of unpublished manuscripts is the writers will come up with a great setup and then they will solve that problem or give the payoff in like the next chapter or by, say, the end of that chapter. And I'm like, oh, you were doing so well, but then you just resolved that problem a little bit too quickly. If you just waited 3 chapters or waited 6 chapters or waited till the end of the book to resolve that problem, it would have kept a lot more tension in the book and been much more pleasurable for the reader. Delay the payoff, delay the solution, keep things unresolved. And for an example of this, have you guys heard of the brick joke? Now, the brick joke is just a writing technique that teaches us how to keep distance between the setup and the payoff. Now, it's called the brick joke because imagine someone throwing a brick up into the air, which is basically like telling the premise of the joke. And then you keep on telling the storyline. And then later on, that brick will finally come down, which is, revealing the punchline, say. A great example of this is from Seinfeld, the episode The Marine Biologist. At the beginning, just for fun, Kramer is hitting a whole bunch of golf balls into the ocean. That's the setup. And then at the very end of the episode, George has pretended he's a marine biologist, so he is forced to go into the ocean and try to save a whale. And he reveals that what was obstructing the whale's blowhole was, a golf ball. Now, the brick joke doesn't only apply to jokes, it really applies to every single part of your narrative structure. You just want that payoff to be as far as possible from that setup. Now, the sixth myth is a very tricky one. It's tough to avoid. It is, and then is good enough. A lot of authors end up getting stuck in this storytelling rut. They're just going along with their story saying, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And they're really being a slave to chronology. But the reader starts to get bored because there's just this repetitive sequence of events and there's not any variety to it. And then storytelling, you know what it resembles? It resembles the 5-paragraph essay. Were any of you tortured by that in high school? Now, I actually taught college for a decade, and a lot of what I did was try to train writers away from writing the 5-paragraph essay, which is basically first main point and this main point and this main point, and try to train them towards a more sophisticated manner of essay. Listen, you shouldn't be writing a 5-paragraph story. They're just not very entertaining, like most 5-paragraph essays. A good story uses different connecting words rather than just and then. What you need are some good therefores in there. Cause and effect. This event caused this next event. E.M. Forster said an actual plot is because the king died, therefore the queen died of grief. A terrible story is the king died and then the queen died. That's a sequence, but it's not a story. Or think about a transition word like a but, right? This is sort of contrast logic in your story. You completely swing the events and come at it from a new angle. Or think about a word like previously, where you go into the backstory of the character, or you go into the backstory of the mom or dad or grandpa. grandpa or grandma. Now, the seventh myth is one that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video. It is staying within the circle of the story. I think a lot of writers get stuck on their plot because they're working with all these characters and the setup that they have, and then they just write themselves into a rut. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you need to throw a grenade from outside your circle story to stir things up. You guys know Raymond Chandler, one of the greatest detective novelists who has ever lived, and he came up with something called Chandler's Law. When you are stuck in your plot, have a man come through the door with a gun. What is he really saying? He's saying, look, if you're stuck, introduce a catalyst to propel the action forward. If you have done everything you can with those characters inside your hermetically sealed circle of your story, then you have to introduce something from the outside to shake it up a little bit. Now, if you're not writing a detective story, maybe it's not a guy with a gun, but maybe it's an out-of-state relative who suddenly, surprisingly, shows up. Or have some sort of natural disaster occur, like an earthquake or a tornado or something. Maybe there's some sort of accidental physical injury, like a bone that gets broken for one of your characters, or maybe a character is pregnant and their water breaks. Now, this next myth is actually one that I personally struggle with a lot. It is number 8. Originality is the highest goal. And I get it. You want your book to be different than everything else out there, right? You don't want it to seem like a knockoff. And to an extent, originality is definitely a good thing. The trouble comes when you've made something so original that it doesn't have a place in the market, or people can't figure out what it is, or they can't understand it. So I think the best advice is to use basic tropes, but then just make them your own. I think an example of how to do this is The Martian by Andy Weir. It's following a very time-worn storytelling structure. It's a person stranded in a hostile environment. I mean, think about everything from Robinson Crusoe to Lost to Castaway. But Weir takes that storytelling concept and then he definitely makes it his own. We see a lot of scientific authenticity as Mark Watney solves problem after problem after problem. We also get to experience Mark's funny voice. You wouldn't expect this novel would be funny, but it is. And by adding in the efforts of Earth to try to go rescue him, we also get this global perspective rather than just being isolated with this one guy on this desert island of Mars. So don't get stuck in the originality trap. Try to make something that feels fresh, but build it on top of a steady structure. And the very last myth that some writers fall prey to is number 9, showing is always better than telling. Now, don't get me wrong, scenes are wonderful. Showing is wonderful, dramatic action. I'm in for that, come on. But there's also a real danger with showing. And the danger is you'll pile up all these scenes, scene after scene after scene, and you'll end up bloating your novel. And so it turns into a 140,000 word novel rather than something a little tidier like 90 or 100,000 word. It is absolutely essential for writers to understand when to skip a whole scene that dramatizes something and just use a line or two that tells us what happened or tells us who that character is. I think there's an excellent case to be made that John le Carré is the best spy novelist of the last century. Fight with me in the comments if you disagree, but he has this book called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I don't think it's his best novel. It's probably Spy Who Came in from the Cold is better, but in the very first 2 pages of this novel, he uses telling at least in 5 different ways that I saw. 1, he introduces a character and he doesn't show how this kid is dull and deficient. He just tells us, hey, this kid's a little dull. And 2, telling is a good way to get the plot started. He just says, oh, if so-and-so hadn't died, then Jim would have never come to this new school. 3, sometimes you need telling to make time pass. Le Carré just says like, oh, 5 years had passed. A 4th great way to use telling is just to characterize a place, in this case, a school. He says, here's a place where the afternoons are tranquil. He does not show that tranquility, he just tells us. A 5th great way to use telling is just history of events. There's a mystery about why there's this big hole in the grounds of this school, and he just tells us, look, they were raising money to finance a pool, but it never got finished. If Le Carré had tried to use showing instead of telling in those first 2 pages, it would have expanded out to probably 10 or 15 pages easily. He wanted a faster pace, he knew he had to start the novel quickly, and so he used telling to get the ball rolling. Hey, don't forget to check out Bookfox Academy, link is in the description, and I hope that learning more about these myths helps you with your novel.